All right, let's get right into it. Today we are tackling one of the biggest strategic decisions you'll ever make in procurement, choosing the right contract type. And let me tell you, this isn't just about figuring out how you're going to pay your seller. No. This is about designing the financial architecture of risk. It's a calculated decision about who is going to shoulder the financial uncertainty of your project.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to build a solid foundation on the whole concept of risk. Then we'll jump into a real-world high-rise case study to see how this stuff actually works. After that, we'll break down the three main contract families. Then shift gears and focus on how to absolutely crush this topic on your PMP exam. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with a quick recap and a look at what's next. Sound good? Let's go.
First up, the foundation of risk. This is where we stop thinking about contracts as just boring legal documents and start seeing them for what they really are, the financial engine that actually drives the project.
So, when we're choosing a contract, what's the real decision we're making? It really boils down to one simple question: who pays if things go wrong? You can almost think of it like a seesaw. If your project scope is crystal clear, super well defined, the seller can confidently take on more risk. But if that scope is foggy, uncertain, or likely to change, that risk swings right back over to you, the buyer. It's the fundamental trade-off at the heart of every single contract you'll ever sign.
Think about how this all flows together. You start out with a make-or-buy analysis, right? You identify a need. Then you set the legal rules of the game with a formal agreement. But step 3, that's the pivot point. You choose the financial model, the contract type, and that single choice is what allocates the risk based on how stable or unstable your scope is. This is the moment you either protect your budget or potentially lose control of it.
And this slide, this really nails the whole concept of the risk spectrum. Just look at the inverse relationship here. It's beautiful. On the left, with a well-defined scope, you go with a fixed-price contract. The price is locked. That means the risk of cost overruns, that sits squarely on the seller's shoulders. The buyer, you can breathe easy. But now look at the right side. When the scope is uncertain, you've got to use a cost-reimbursable contract. The final cost is a giant question mark, so all that risk shifts right over to the buyer. You pay for that uncertainty, but what you get in return is the flexibility to change and adapt.
Okay, enough with the theory. Let's make this concrete. We're going to go back to our high-rise construction project and see how you can actually use different financial models for different parts of the very same project.
And here's where the real strategy comes into play. Take a look at the electrical wiring. It's standard, it's repetitive, we've done it 1,000 times, the blueprints are exact, the scope definition is high. So what do? It's a no-brainer. We use a firm fixed-price contract and we put that risk right where it belongs, on the seller. Now, contrast that with the experimental AI management system. Honestly, we don't know exactly what it's going to look like in the end. The scope is absolutely going to evolve. So in this case, a cost-plus fixed-fee contract is the smart play. It gives us, the buyer, the flexibility we need, even though it means we're taking on the financial risk.
All right, now let's drill down into the three contract families themselves. Understanding the little differences here is absolutely essential, not just for managing projects in the real world, but for passing your PMP exam.
Okay, the key thing here is knowing which tool to pull out of the toolbox and when. Let's break them down. First, the fixed price family. FFP is your rock-solid, no surprises, what you see is what you get contract. Then you have FPIF, which adds a cool twist, incentives to reward your seller for good performance, but with a ceiling price to protect you, the buyer. And FPEPA is perfect for those long-term projects to handle things like inflation. Now the cost-reimbursable family. CPFF is fantastic when your scope is totally fluid. It pays the seller's costs plus a fixed profit. CPIF is pretty similar, but it adds an incentive to encourage the seller to save money. And finally, time and materials. This is your hybrid, perfect for bringing in specialized experts. You fix their hourly rate, but the total cost is open-ended, which is exactly why you always, and I mean always, want to include a not-to-exceed clause to protect your budget.
Okay, let's switch gears and focus squarely on the PMP exam. The test isn't just going to ask you for definitions. Nope. It's going to throw a scenario at you and expect you to apply all this logic strategically.
Here are the keys to absolutely acing those questions. If you see keywords in a question like vague or emerging or unclear, your brain should immediately scream avoid fixed price. You also have to understand how sharing ratios work, like an 80-20 split on cost savings or overruns, and you must know the point of total assumption, the PTA. Think of the PTA as the financial cliff in a fixed price incentive contract. It's the exact dollar amount where the cost sharing stops cold, and from that point on, the seller is on the hook for 100% of every single dollar of cost overrun. It's the buyer's ultimate shield.
So how do you actually choose one in the real world? It's basically a three-step evaluation. First, you assess your requirements' stability. Are they clear as day? Go fixed price. Are they vague? Go cost reimbursable. Easy. Second, you define your incentive alignment. What do you care about most? Speed? Savings? Use an incentive fee to make sure the seller's goals line up with your goals. And third, you analyze the market. If there's a ton of competition, you can probably push for a fixed price deal. But if you need a niche expert, you might have to offer a cost reimbursable contract to even get them to the table.
All right, let's pull all this together and do a quick recap of the core principles before we look ahead at what's coming next.
Okay, here it is, your core principles cheat sheet. Let's lock this stuff in. Ready? Fixed price, defined scope, seller takes the risk. Cost reimbursable, uncertain scope, buyer takes the risk. Time and materials, your go-to hybrid for bringing in the experts. Incentives, the tool you use to align the seller's motivation with your project's goals. PTA, that's the point of no return where the seller eats all the cost overruns. And finally, admin effort. Just remember, it's high for cost reimbursable contracts and low for fixed price. Got it? Good.
So we've totally mastered the financial models. We know how to allocate risk. We know how to determine payment. We know how we're going to pay. But that just leads to the next logical question, right? How do we actually go out to the market and tell potential sellers what we need in the first place? Well, in our next explainer, we're going to dive into exactly that. Mastering procurement documents and simplifying the whole world of RFPs, RFQs, and IFBs. I'll see you there.